Travis Tougaw, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for reaching out. It took a little while to set this up. You reached out a few months ago, which I really appreciate, anticipating the release of your first debut novel, I believe, coming up in a week from today. We're talking on January 4th.
That's right. Foxholes comes out on January 11th.
Fantastic. We will get to Foxholes in just a very quick second, but why don't you start just by introducing yourself a little bit? Tell us, first of all, where are we catching you today? And give us a little background on your professional life, things like that.
Sure. Yep. So I'm currently in Denver, Colorado. I've been here since 2010. We moved to Denver in March of 2010, so coming up on 14 years. I grew up a military brat. My dad was in the Air Force, so we bounced around quite a bit. Lived in Colorado a couple of different times, and I always wanted to get back to Colorado. After college, I went into the Air Force, so kind of followed into his footsteps, and I was in for 9 years. And same thing, bounced around a bit, but one of my assignments was teaching English at the Air Force Academy, which was a great job. And I loved it, loved Colorado Springs. And my wife and I decided when we get the chance, we're moving back to Colorado. And after I left the Air Force, I found work in Denver and I've been here ever since and love it.
That's great. So you weren't a fighter pilot or anything like that?
No, no, I am. I'm far too blind to fly planes. They don't want me in a cockpit. I was a public affairs officer, so dealing with the media, and then had that special duty assignment as a teacher.
Well, you and I have a lot in common then because I spent years as director of communications for Denver Public Schools and the State Department of
Okay.
Education and fielding media, catching hand grenades, as I used to call it.
Yeah, yeah. Never a dull moment in that line of work.
Yeah, that's great. So, why is the Air Force the best of the military branches?
Um, it was the best for me. That's for sure. I think the Air Force does a really good job of taking care of its people, and really making sure that you've got opportunities for education, especially, and developing you and really letting you follow the career path that you want to follow.
Yeah, it's got a pretty good culture. I mean, there were some issues at the Air Force Academy. I know it can get pretty, maybe I'm getting into territory that you'd rather not get into, but there were issues of heavy, I don't know what the right word is, just in terms of very strict and pretty, I don't know, just controversial uh, sort of studying and living conditions at times.
Yeah, I was there from 2003 to 2006, and there were a few scandals that broke during
Yeah.
that time. It's I like to tell people, it's a military base, yes, but it's also a college, and cadets are college students, and so all the problems that you might have at a normal university, you're going to have in the dorms at the Air Force Academy as well. Um, they're held to a higher standard in the public eye as they should be as future military officers. And so typically if a scandal breaks out or something happens in the dorm rooms at CU, it might not be front page news, but if it happens at the Air Force Academy, not only is it on the Denver Post, but it's in the New York Times and everywhere
Yeah.
else. So it gets a lot of attention.
Yeah. Well, on the brighter side, the football team had a great year this year, so there's
Yeah.
that. That must have been fun to see because they really rolled this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're a long way from fiction, but what the heck, it's good to get to know you a little bit in different ways. Um, how long have you been writing fiction?
I've been writing fiction for a while. Over 20 years. I've had an interest in writing my whole life. I'm wanting to be a storyteller and to put words on paper. I've always had a drive to do that. In fact, when I was graduating high school and looking at what I wanted to major in, I was talking to an enrollment counselor at the college I ended up going to in Texas, and he asked, well, what are you good at? And first I said, not math. And then I said, I'm a pretty good writer. And he said, well, did you know that IBM hired more English majors last year than they did computer scientists? And he really encouraged me towards an English degree. And so I did that and took some writing classes. But writing classes in college tend to gravitate around short fiction, short stories, essays. So that's what I wrote for a while. And it wasn't until after I had my master's degree that I wanted to start experimenting with a longer form and looking at writing novels. So I wrote my first novel in 2006, 2007 timeframe, and it never went anywhere. But that was like the best education I could have as a writer, was actually getting through a long project start to finish and figuring out that when you're halfway through and you realize your premise isn't working, what do you do besides chucking the whole thing? When you think you're done and you only have 45,000 words, that's not a novel, right? What do you do? So things like that they don't really teach you in a writing program at school was a very valuable education. And so, over the years since that time, I've worked on different projects, and finally, over the last couple of years, I hit on one that I think works, and looking forward to seeing it in print. So.
Yeah. Did you share that first novel with anybody? Did you bring it out to friends or fellow writers or anybody, or just keep all that learning to yourself?
Yeah, so my wife got to read it. She reads everything that I write, and she's a good reader and a good critic. So I appreciate her insights. And I did share it with a few agents that I met at different writing conferences. Got some positive feedback on it, some constructive feedback on it. Essentially, the consensus was this isn't ready for prime time, but you're developing some good habits as a writer, so
Yeah,
keep it up.
that's great. That's great. Um, well, let's move ahead then to Foxholes. What
Sure.
was the inspiration for that? And tell us about give us the setup.
Yeah, so Foxholes, essentially, I'll give you the inspiration first.
Yeah.
So I deployed to Afghanistan, and as part of my parting gift from the Air Force, as I was getting ready to leave, they had one last assignment for me, which was to be the public affairs officer for the Air Force at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. So I was there from January through May 2007. And so then fast forward, 14 years, and the Air Force is withdrawing from Afghanistan. And seeing that on the news, there was a lot of emotion with that, both of seeing the mass exodus of people from Afghanistan, and that the Afghans trying to board US aircraft and evacuate, and not being able to. But then also the images, of the Taliban walking through Bagram, where I had been assigned, and where, while I was there, people died defending that base, and trying to make sure that it remained, NATO territory and US territory. And so seeing that we had just given that back so easily, and it really made me ask some hard questions about, well, what was it all for? Was it really worth it? What did we get out of this? It felt like we had just erased 20 years of history and gone back in time. And then it struck me as I was thinking through that and processing my own thoughts about it. Some politician somewhere is going to use this as a talking point in the next election, right? This is going to be what someone runs on. And then the writer in me started playing what if with that, and saying, well, what if that person wasn't such a great person and had some secrets in their closet? And what if someone who had been in Afghanistan and knew that person, way back when, decided to go back and investigate things that happened 15 years previously, and try to prove that this person is not what they're making themselves out to be, and stop them from gaining power. And so that becomes the setup for Foxholes. It's about an Air Force veteran, Vince Marcotte, who was a paralegal in the Air Force, who sees a campaign ad for Nick Batson running for Senate in Colorado, and remembers Nick from their time together in Afghanistan. And he believes that Nick got away with murder, that he killed an airman under his command, and it got swept under the rug, and deemed a suicide. No one ever looked too far into it, and Vince decides enough is enough. Too much time has gone by. This guy's getting too powerful. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to be the one to bring him down.
Wow. Wow. So does it take place? Where does it take place?
So it's The plot kind of has a dual structure to it. So there's action that takes place in Afghanistan in 2007, and then there's action that takes place in Colorado in 2022. And I try to bounce between the two timelines and allow the past to inform the present events, and be able to show how Vince grows and changes, and how the things that made him who he was from 2007, he's able to, hopefully by the end of the novel, let go of and show some growth as a person there in 2022.
Wow. Well, it sounds like it might have been a little tricky to, sort of make sure that the chapters you're revealing from the past are lined up and neatly kind of meshed with 2022. Was that hard?
It was, and I found that the Afghanistan chapters were easier to write. Partially because I was drawing from a lot of personal experience. I mean, it's made up. I didn't have a commander who I suspected of murder,
Yeah.
so I just want to put that out there. So Vince's action did not mirror my action in Afghanistan, but I knew the environment. I knew the world that he was in. I had lived there. I had walked there, and so I found those chapters were very easy to write, and I ended up writing a lot of that material up front, and then started working on the 2022 story, and then figuring out how to integrate them, and when is it time to do a flashback, when is it time to remain in current day. And I think that was probably more successful than if I had tried to write it bouncing back and forth. I think I would have confused myself, and it would have been a much harder project.
Yeah. When you look at the way you were able to piece this together and just what you've learned since that first novel, 2006, 2007-ish,
Mhm.
what was different?
I think this time a couple of things. One was I knew where the landmines were going to be. So I knew kind of in constructing a plot, um, how do I make sure before I even start writing that I've got this planned out well enough in my mind, that I've got the end in mind. I kind of know the major arc of the story, and I can figure out how to write myself out of problems if I get into them. But then the second part, which may contradict a little bit of what I just said, was that I did not outline the whole thing out. I used to be a very extensive outliner where, if it was going to happen in my book, it was in my outline first. And this time I did a little more seat of the pants, where I knew in my mind, here's where the story's going, but I gave the characters a little more freedom to speak up and give me some direction. And there was one character in particular who I thought, as I was writing him, that he was a throwaway. He was just a prop to make the scene work. And it turns out, a few chapters later, he was really kind of speaking up to me and saying, you know what, I've got a bigger role in this than you think,
Uh,
and you need to pay attention. And that, to me as a writer, that was a very gratifying experience.
that is just one of the pleasures of writing, is those
Yeah.
surprises. So walk us through sort of your process day to day, and has that process changed? And then also tell us a little bit about just that when you started getting close to a draft you were happy with Foxholes at this stage, who are you sharing it with? How did you bring it out? What was sort of your process to look for a publisher and all that?
Sure. Yeah, so my writing process, I try to stick to, around my schedule is to write 1,000 words a day, Monday through Friday, and then 2,000 words on the weekends. So 1,000 words Saturday morning, 1,000 words Saturday afternoon, and then same thing on Sunday. And I find that typically the best time that worked for me was right after I get done working. I work with a lot of people on the East Coast, so I start my day early. But it means I finish my day a little bit before my kids get home from school, and so I've got that gap, that sweet spot where I can sit at the kitchen counter and write for a while uninterrupted. And so I try to stay in the seat until I've hit my word count for the day.
Nice.
Um, and then sometimes I'll go back the next day and reread what I wrote the day before and edit it before I jump back into writing. Some days, if I've been thinking about it, I'm just ready to write, I'll just jump in. But after I get the first draft, I'll put it away for a few weeks and then come back to it and read through the whole thing, see where is it not as great as I thought it was when I was writing it? Where do I need to lift something? Smooth some rough edges here and there. Do I need to recast any of the plot? And so that second draft is a pretty major revision, and then I'll go through, again, put it aside for a little while, and then come back to it and do the heavy proofread on it and make sure it reads right.
Mm.
And so then at that point, then usually my beta reader is my wife. Again, she's a very good reader, very very good critic, and gives me honest feedback. And so she'll tell me if it's good or not. And so in this case, she really liked it. It resonated with her. She felt like it was ready. So thinking about the traditional publishing versus self-publishing route, which way do I want to go with this one? I wanted to go with the traditional publishing route, particularly with it being a first novel. I wanted to get that validation from an outside publisher, from someone saying, yes, we're willing to invest in this. We believe in this too. And so I started, before my publisher hunt, I started looking for agents to see if I could find an agent to work with, because most of the publishing houses want you to be agented.
Right.
So I went to the manuscript wishlist website and started looking for agents who did crime fiction and military fiction and who were accepting submissions. And so every day I would find 5 to send it to, just working through alphabetically and keeping a spreadsheet of who have I sent it to, what have they said.
Right.
And so I started doing that in the spring of 2022. So I finished writing, in January, February 2022. Started sending it out to agents in March, April timeframe. And in June, one of the agents that I had queried sent me an email and said she'd like to see the whole manuscript. So I thought, great. And I fired that off to her. And then we were actually in vacation on Alaska. And I got an email from her, and she said that she'd like to have a call with me to talk about the book. So I let her know, we're about to be out of cell phone range for 3 days. Can we set something up for when I get back to Colorado? So we set up a meeting for a little later in August, and she signed on with me, as for me to be her client. And so her process, then, she's a writer as well as an agent, and her
Can we say
process is to do a full edit before
can we say
she.
her name? Can we say her name?
Yes, Cindy Bullard with Birch Literary. She's out of North Carolina, and Cindy is fantastic. So Cindy likes to do an edit on books before she sends them to publishers. So she went through and gave a lot of good feedback, really insightful comments, not changing any plot points, but really her eye was looking for what's going to cause an editor to reject this.
Yeah.
And so looking for anything that'll make an editor stop reading. And so particularly like those first 50 pages or so, it was pretty intense with, getting feedback and some give and take. But I think everything she said made it better. And so then once we had worked through those edits, then she started probably around October 2022 sending it out to publishers. She starts with the big 5 and then moves to smaller publishers from there. And so by the end of December, we take a break over the holidays because no one's at the publishing houses. And
Yeah.
so she had sent me an email and said, could you, while we've got some downtime, could you write up a 750 word synopsis of the novel that I can use? We had a novel, we had the novel, we had the query letter, we had a 250 word synopsis, but she wanted something to give editors a little bit more. So I worked on that, and she started querying again in January. And in March, she called me with an offer from Black Rose Writing, which is a smaller publisher in Texas. And so I looked at what they had sent over and ultimately decided to sign with them. And then they asked if I felt like the book had series potential. I told them I did. And so I got a contract for 2 more books. So
Oh,
all
wow.
3 are actually coming out this year. So
What?
2023 was a busy, busy year.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So we're talking from this is now January 4th. We're talking last March you got this offer?
Yes.
And did you have these other books ready?
I did not. So
What?
I did a foolish thing, which was after Foxholes was over. What I should have done was immediately started work on the second one. And what I did instead was worked on a different project that had struck me as brilliant. And so I completed another novel before I wrote books 2 and 3 in this series. And so when she sent me the contracts, I was anticipating they would want to do like a book a year or something like that. And I thought, oh, I'll have plenty of time to write. And they asked for the manuscript for the second book by, I think it was August 1st, and the third book by November 1st. And this was in March. So
I'm
it
sorry.
was a whirlwind for the rest of the year.
I mean, I cannot imagine. I would say thanks for the offer, but in my shoes, I just don't have the capability to produce that fast.
I find that deadlines are really good motivators for me. And I probably don't back down from as many challenges as I should. So I took it on. And again, it was really testing my discipline of you put yourself in the chair and you don't get out of the chair until you've hit your word count for today. And I scheduled out like, okay, these are going to be, somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words. How many weeks is it going to take to get there? And then I'll need time for editing and, get this polished and ready for an editor.
Wow.
So scheduled it out and kept an app on my iPad with my writing goals for each day so I could check it off and feel good about marking something off the to-do list. But that was how I spent most of 2023 was sitting at the bar in the kitchen writing after work.
And you're still smiling.
Yeah, it ended up being a good time. I ended up I enjoyed the series. And again, I didn't have everything planned out. I had a general idea of where things were going to go. There was a character that came up in Foxholes that I decided I wanted to center the second book around. Hadley Collins, who's an amateur detective who helps Vince out in his investigation. So the second book tells her story, and then the third book is a private detective they get involved with. I decided to tell more of his story. And so the second and third books follow the same format. I wanted to try to thematically stay the same and format wise stay the same to where we're doing the dual timeline and bouncing back and forth between a cold case and a current case. And so it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to write that way and get to know these characters really, really well. And I found that it being a series, it was a lot easier than starting from scratch with the characters that, by the time I got around to book 3, I knew these people so well that the writing just came naturally at that point.
Wow. Well, Foxholes comes out on January 11th. Can you reveal the titles of the other two and what's the general schedule for the releasing those?
So the second book is called Captives, and it's about a kidnapping case, a missing child that they investigate. And that one will release in June of 2024, I think June 6th. And then the last one is called Last Call, um, and it comes out in November of 2024.
Wow. Wow. I mean, you're sitting here on January 4th, 2024, no books out in the world. In a year, you will have 3 books out in the world. Can you even imagine what that's going to feel like?
I really can't. I mean, it's pretty surreal. The first one's coming out in a week.
Yeah.
That hasn't, there from the time I got the contract, there were a couple points where it was like, oh wow, this is for real. This isn't just a dream. One was when I saw the cover for the first time. It's like, okay, this is it. This I feel like a real author now.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's been just the whole experience has been surreal, and I'm hoping that I get a chance to take a breath and really enjoy it after the first one comes out.
What are your plans around marketing and the launch of book number 1?
Yep. So I've done some early reviews with different authors and some different review sites. I used Book Sirens and Library Thing to get some early reviews. I've been doing some social media marketing. The publisher has a mailing list that they will send it out to on release day, and then probably a couple updates after that. Um, And then we've partnered with BookBub
Sure.
to do a promotion a little later. I think in about 2 weeks we'll run that promotion on the ebook, and then we'll see where we're at as far as where we're at with number of reviews, number of sales, things like that. The publisher has some metrics in mind that they want to hit before they start pushing any Amazon or Facebook ads, and so we would look at doing some marketing that way. But with a smaller press, it's still a lot of it is word of mouth and getting people to tell their friends that they read it, and getting people to recommend it to other readers.
Right, right. Can you talk a little bit about Black Rose writing and just would you recommend other folks look into them based on what you know so far?
I would recommend them, looking into them and seeing if it's the right fit for you. There's some real good advantages to having a small company, and some disadvantages. One of the advantages is that I've met everyone there. They had a conference in September, and so I've met everyone who's on the Black Rose staff
Oh,
in
wow.
person, and I can email them if I've got a question about something, and they get back to me. It's not going to some third assistant editor who may or may not know what my project is. Everyone there is invested in making Foxholes succeed, so that's been great.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe a disadvantage, and they don't do as much with support for writers in terms of like editing, review of the text, that type of thing. They really rely on the author to provide a good manuscript. There was an automated, software based edit that they provided me to review and decide what changes I wanted, and which ones I didn't. But they really turned editorial control over to me. This was my book, and they let me run with it. Which I appreciate, but it also terrifies me.
Yeah.
I know there's a typo that I missed somewhere in those 12 edits, right?
Yeah.
It's hiding in there, and it will be plain for the world to see on January 11th. And so things like that, I wish we'd gotten a little more support in that way. But overall, they've been really good to work with. Um, and then I guess the other advantage, and end on a positive, is that they've got a Facebook group for their authors, and the authors at Black Rose have been an incredibly supportive community. I've met a lot of really great people, and I don't have a lot of other writers in my life that I interact with on a day-to-day basis before this experience, but now I do. And so I've made a lot of really good friends and have gotten a lot of support and encouragement, and just a lot of good people who are all trying to help one another succeed, which is nice.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, the approach that they took to editing must make you really appreciate what Cindy put you through before submitting it to Black Rose.
Yes, yep, am grateful for Cindy every day.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be here definitely would not be here without her help, and the novel would not be nearly as good as it is without her input.
Yeah. Well, speaking of writing pals, when did you engage with Rocky Mountain fiction writers?
So became a member about a year ago. I think I joined last February, around the time I was starting to send this out to agents and thinking, you know what, I can probably consider myself a fiction writer once again. I've finished a project, and maybe it's time to engage with some other writers, and find some other folks locally that can I can offer support to, and that can support me.
Did you go to Colorado Gold, the conference this year, last year?
I did not. Unfortunately, it coincided with the publishers conference, where I met all the Black Rose staff, and I felt like that one was probably more important with three books coming out this year. So I went there, but hopefully this year I'll be able to make it to the Colorado Gold.
Well, I highly recommend it. Highly, highly recommend it. It is
Yeah.
just incredible energy, and I mean, I learn stuff every time I go. It's just so
Yeah.
inspiring. And the other group I'd pass along just a recommendation if it sounds like you have plenty of mystery elements and it doesn't really matter, thriller, whatever.
Mhm.
Rocky Mountain chapter of Mystery Writers of America for
Mhm.
sure is a great, great group. And there's it's it's much smaller than Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers because it's just one genre as opposed to
Yeah.
RMFW, which is welcomes everybody, which is great. But RMMWA is a fantastic group and a great place. And you maybe could even do a presentation there and good way to market the book. So just
For sure.
passing a suggestion along. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll look into them for sure.
Yeah. Great bunch. So you've got three books coming out this coming year. I almost dread to ask what's next.
So, well, I've got that other project that I worked on when I should have been writing the second book in the series is with Cindy now, and we finished our edits on it just before the holidays, and so she's going to start sending that out in a little later this month, I think in about 2 weeks, as the editors start getting back to work. So it is, I think it's probably a contemporary fiction, and its genre. It's not a thriller. Um, Maybe has some mystery to it, but it's very different from the series that I worked on. So she'll be sending that out, and then I've begun work on another thriller that I'm calling The Other Side of the Island, that involves two estranged brothers, an uninhabited island in the Caribbean, and a cult.
Okay.
So I think it'll be fun to finish writing. I'm about 30,000 words into it, so I kind of know where it's going, and know who the main players are, and it's very different from the other things that I've written, and it's been a lot of fun.
Wow. Prolific. Wow, Travis, that's you're setting a pace. That's great. That's great. Well, as we wrap up, we always like to give our guests a chance to promote a book in particular, or maybe an author in general you think needs more attention. It could be a big name too, just, a writer or a book you enjoy.
Yeah, so one of the authors that I met through Black Rose Writing, and I think he's an RMFW member as well, is Cam Torrens. And he's got two books out with Black Rose. One is called Stable, and the other is called False Summit. I have not read False Summit yet, but it should be showing up in the mail any day now. I read Stable, his debut novel, earlier in the year, and it was fantastic. It was a great thriller, a lot of really well written characters in there, a very tense plot, and Cam is a great person and a great writer. So I definitely want to encourage folks to check him out. He's well worth your time.
Fantastic. Exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. That's great. Well, Travis, thank you so much for your time on the podcast today, and good luck with a very busy 2024. I have to be careful when I say the year because I'm still in the habit of saying 2023, but Happy New Year to you. And, anytime you want to jump back on and share something you've learned or anything about your upcoming releases, just let us know.
Sounds good. I really appreciate you having me on.